So good morning, evening, everybody. Welcome to Core Developers meeting number 72. Um, Small crowd today, so everyone must be on the plane to DEF CON. We have a pretty short agenda, so it shouldn't be the longest Core Dev call. And yeah, we can jump right into it. So the first item on the agenda was Istanbul uh, the Istanbul Ropsten fork recap. Um, I don't know if anyone wanted to give just a quick update about what happened there.
Peter, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, yeah, if nobody else. So essentially, the Robson fork came about 2 days earlier than we expected.
And yeah, we can jump right into it. So the
It was
first,
kind of a surprise, but it turned out that somebody is mining Robson with about 1.5 gigahashes. So that's, I don't know, 50s or so GPUs, or if the calculations are correct. Either way, it's somebody's pushing Robson really hard. And essentially, so it came 2 days earlier. We had kind of a scare because it looked like the fork failed, and then it turned out that no, actually the fork did succeed. The problem was that this miner who is pushing with 1.6 gigahashes Ropsten, it's actually pushing the non-forked chain. So we have a huge miner on non-Istanbul Ropsten currently. And for the past couple of days, we've spent trying to figure out what's happening in Ropsten because the network currently is really, really unhealthy. And it kind of boils down to the fact that most people did not upgrade yet their nodes to Ropsten. And so most of the nodes are non-Istanbul nodes. And since there's also a really heavy non-Istanbul chain, it makes upgraded nodes, minority upgraded nodes, so to say, quite annoying to operate currently. And it it did surface also a few issues, namely that so essentially currently what's happening is that non-upgraded Ropsten nodes are eclipsing the upgraded ones. And so for Geth specifically, we do have, I think I already posted on the Oracle Labs call and also on Twitter, that we do have a flag. If you run it with that, then it will filter out the non-upgraded chain and you should be ready to go. I'm not sure for parity, but long story short, it's a bit of an issue, and we have a few proposals on how we can avoid this scenario in the future. But for Opston, it's already too late to retrospectively add those fixes. So it's for Opston, it's kind of we need to ride the wave until the upgraded Istanbul chain gets heavier than the other one, or enough people update. So and until then, it's kind of a firefighting mode. You can run Geth with this whitelisting flag. For the other clients, I'm sure they can give you some option on how to get on the correct chain.
Yeah, if I can add a bit to that. So the last time we worked is Ropsten, it caused some problems for the app developers. We're doing some finalized testing on that. I think the Raiden team. But this time, no one from the DApp community has actually reached out. And so on the previous occasion, I thought it was a really, really good test of how the clients handle long chains, but there was kind of uh, bad feeling from the DApp developers. This time around, it doesn't appear that anyone is actively complaining. And from an infrastructure perspective, I think it's super interesting to see this how the clients behave when there are longer, higher TD side chains with embedded blocks. And as Peter said, we have a couple of proposals. One of them, Peter's going to talk about one of them, and we have some new features that we're going to implement in Geth to make Geth handle these scenarios better. So I think it's really, really valuable and worthwhile to actually do these massive forks. It brings a lot of stuff up for attention, and that's about it for me.
Yeah, just to add one minor thing that even though Ropsten fork currently is was a bit of a shit show, there's no reason, so there are no worries that a similar thing might happen for mainnet, since we don't expect mainnet to be all of a sudden pushed by a 10x miner on a non-forking chain.
Thanks for the recap, Martin and Peter. I don't know if anyone else has like comments or thoughts they want to add about this. Okay, and I guess yeah, just to be explicit about this, even though there were some issues on Ropsten, all the other test nets were still going forward as is. There's no specific action we're taking aside from the changes in Geth and the sort of proposals you want to implement, but those don't change the other test nets, correct?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to find the button. So the currently, I guess there are two more testnets that that I'm familiar with. That's Rinkeby and Gurley, but both these testnets have essentially they are proof of authority testnets. So as long as the miners upgrade, you cannot have an alternative. So it's a proof of authority testnet where only the majority chain can progress. So either you have non-upgraded chain progressing or you have an updated Istanbul chain progressing, but you cannot have two concurrent ones. So from this perspective, Gurley and Rinkeby are completely immune to the issue that happened on Ropsten.
Got it. So we should, at the very least, make sure that we kind of message clearly to people, to validators on these testnets that they really should upgrade. So this is probably like an action items for the cat herders to just follow up and make sure that there's like clear communications about that. There was one blog post already written about the testnets on the cat herders blog. So we'll make sure to get that spread widely. Anything else?
Yeah, so
Oh,
I think
please go ahead.
so contacting validators, that I guess the Gurley team probably has a list of people they need to ping. As for Rinkeby, the foundation is kind of running 3 validators, and we have 4 more validators running by Oracleize, Augur, Akasha, and I'm not sure who the 4th one is now. But we can definitely reach out to them, and we're also regularly monitoring the status of the updates on the Rinkeby stats page. So Rinkeby is probably safe, but as for Gurley, that's up for the Gurley team to reach out and make sure.
Great. So yeah, let's keep this as an action item for the cat herders to reach out to the Gordy team. Anything else on the testnet upgrades? Okay. If not, second point on the agenda was just still a quick shout out to the Ethereum roadmap session at DevCon. So this will be on the first day of DevCon, and basically all of the afternoon will be split into a session to discuss the ETH1 roadmap, then the ETH1 to ETH2 roadmap, and then the ETH2 roadmap. And I think there's some time at the end of the afternoon as well for if working groups form or want to discuss specific ideas. So if that's something that you're interested in, it would be great to have a lot of people from both the core dev side as well as the broader community side to discuss these things. I don't know if anyone has comments, thoughts about this. Okay. So next point on the agenda was Ice Age. And I think Hudson had a comment about whether we should plan to delay the difficulty bomb in Istanbul or in the following fork, which is called Berlin. And more generally to know, do we have an idea when the difficulty bomb will start being activated again, and when we have to defuse it?
Oh, I thought he was going to prepare that data for you. I have not calculated.
I have some should be verified back in the hand math that I've done.
as last year, TJ Rush and I really investigated the difficulty bomb at a hackathon, and then worked with Vitalik and Lane to make a script. So there is a script somewhere floating around that predicts it, or I predicted it fairly well. From my memory, it took about 12, and just checking back historically, it took about 12 months for it to start showing up 14 months when it started showing up last time. And given that we're about half the hash power, it should take longer for it to show up than it did last time, because the way the absolute hash power actually has it show up earlier or later relative to those numbers. So given that, it's in the April, May, June, July range that we might see something.
Oh, I thought it was much sooner than that. Because the previous postponement said that, if I recall correctly, it would the next time would be like winter, this coming winter. But you're saying it's not until spring then?
Well, when the fork was implemented on March 1st last time, when at least the block times went down.
I guess I need to go back and figure that out. Figure out how far we pushed it back. I think we pushed it back even farther than we did last time as well.
It went from 3 million blocks to 5 million blocks, I think. Byzantium was 3 million, Constantinople was 5 million, so we only pushed it back 2 more million blocks, which is roughly a year.
Okay, so then, yeah, it would be still on the march, but it should show up slower because the hash rate is so much less than it was last time.
I thought it was going to show up earlier with less hash rate because it's an absolute add regardless of hash rate.
From my research before, because it adds the hash rate before, the block hash rate before and the current one, then actually the larger the magnitude, the more of an effect it would have. So it showed up earlier and more aggressive last time because the hash rate was so high compared to the time before. So this time, if the hash rate is less, it will show up later and less aggressively. But I can.
So I pasted a link to the EAP in the All Dev channel. Now I lost it. There we go. And it says in the rationale what they calculated back then. They estimated that it would hit 30-second block times at the end of 2018. It looks odd. Oh, sorry, that's not the latest one.
But I think the takeaway, whether it's a month one way or the other, is this is something we need to address probably in the first quarter.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think Hudson's question was whether we want to address this in Istanbul or not. But unless it is extremely urgent to do something, I would really be against doing it in Istanbul, simply because we already defined what Istanbul is and Ropsten already forked. So if we start to redefine what Istanbul is, then the Ropsten fork is kind of invalid unless we do another Petersburg number 2 to do a double fork on mainnet and a hotfix fork on Ropsten. So unless there's actually a reason to push the delay soon, then I wouldn't. And also, we were talking that it would be really nice to do a second hard fork, second part of Istanbul in a couple months, called, I think that was named Berlin, or at least a tentative name for it. And it's supposed to have it. The idea was that it's not a hard fork that's open to adding everything, rather a very focused hard fork for adding some cryptography. And we can always say that it gets the cryptography plus the delay and done. Or alternatively, we can try to go down Martin's suggested pathway of preparing EIPs and forking when something's ready. Either way, I wouldn't do it in Istanbul.
Yeah, it seems like there's no major reason to do it. If James' calculations are remotely correct, it should give us well enough time to plan this for another fork and not delay Istanbul. Does anyone sort of disagree with that?
Well, I guess if the ice age cannot be even felt currently, not even a bit, then I don't think we should be in too much of a rush.
And the delay of the last fork also, I think, would affect our initial target of around Christmas or whatever, because it ended up going out 2 months later, almost. So the year would still be March, the year mark.
Great.
Okay. So the next agenda item was testing updates. I saw there was a comment about the consensus tests, and it tagged both Martin and Dano. So I don't know if either of you have an update.
All the tests except for the 220 tests that Martin and I put together have been merged into the reference tests now. There is one concern about a particular random state test 94. Clients just need to be aware it's going to consume about 1 trillion gas when you run it. So if you run it in parallel, it's going to consume too much memory, issues like that. But reference tests for everything but the 220 are committed.
Great. Any other comments on the testing?
No, I can give a small update about the fuzzing. So, yeah, it's been keeping fuzzing stuff millions and millions of times, and I've found nothing so far.
Okay. Thanks, Martin. Dano? I see we also have Lewis on the call who joined. I don't know if you wanted to bring up anything specifically, Lewis, because we're kind of at the end of what was the most important thing scheduled for the agenda.
No, nothing specific. I just want to was available. I wanted to hear what's going on.
Okay, cool. So next item on the agenda is reviewing action items. So before we do that, does anyone else have anything they'd like to discuss or bring up?
So, Peter, would it now be a good time about the fork ID?
Oh yeah. I thought we were going to get to that. So yeah, it's just a tiny proposal. Although the idea would be to get some feedback on it. Either way, so long story short, one of the issues with Ropsten, so the reason currently Ropsten is having a hard time uh, doing anything is because networking-wise, the forked network, the pool of forked nodes and the pool of non-forked nodes have no idea that each other. So the nodes have no idea whether a peer is forked or not. The only thing currently they can do in the Ethereum protocols is try to advertise each other's fork chains and blocks to each other, and they download it from each other, and then they realize that okay, something deep down is not compatible or some block is invalid. And the problem is that if we don't do anything to somehow separate the peers from each other at a more lower level, at the networking level, then it just puts a really nasty strain on the whole block processing, block validation, everything. And way back, we had a proposal with we did it with Felix about half a year ago. So whenever two peers do a handshake with each other currently, they exchange the Genesis block, the hash of the Genesis block. And the idea was that this way we can have multiple. The problem is that this one cannot detect if two peers share the same Genesis block, but then forked away from each other, kind of like Ethereum and Ethereum Classic or Ropsten and Ropsten Istanbul, etc. And the idea was that instead of exchanging the hash of the Genesis block, we should exchange something else that contains both the Genesis hash but also all the forks somehow meshed together. And we figured with Felix, we came up with this idea of a fork ID, which is kind of like just the checksum of the Genesis hash along with all the fork block numbers. And the proposal, we had an EIP, it's already accepted and merged in. And my proposal would be to publish a new version of the ETH protocol. So essentially bump the ETH protocol to ETH64. And the only change would be to replace this Genesis hash in the handshake to this fork ID. And what it would allow us to do is that when two peers connect, then even if they have the same Genesis block, they will immediately know whether they are compatible or incompatible with each other fork-wise. And this would actually, if this would have been implemented on Ropsten currently, then the two networks, the ones who didn't fork into Istanbul and the ones who forked into Istanbul, they would have separated really cleanly at a networking level. And then all of these messy synchronization, block processing problems would have been solved. And then the idea, so I think it's a really elegant solution. If anyone wants to take a look, please take a look. I linked in the EIP. And plus the proposal is just replacing a single field in the handshake. The question is whether does anyone have any objection against publishing an ETH64 version? Well, since the ETH namespace is the official Ethereum protocol, we didn't just want the Geth team to publish a new version unilaterally and say that this is the version 64. But we would really like to do so, and it's really a more or less trivial change. So that's why we're kind of optimistic that the effort to implement it is really tiny, and the benefit would be huge, especially for test networks. And of course, even if we do implement it, Geth would definitely keep speaking the old protocol side by side. So it's not like we want to roll out something incompatible, rather it would be just an updated version. So action item, does anyone have anything opposing to us defining ETH64 as this fork ID thing and rolling it out?
So in ETH Magicians, there was a thread with a lot of other ideas for sorts of things that would go into ETH64. Stuff relating to like archive versus partial nodes, doing things like not sending out the log bloom on the transaction message to reduce the burden on the wire protocol. Should we consider if there's anything that's easy to put in that's quick as well in that, or are you committed to just having this being a one feature change, ETH64, and moving all those suggestions to an ETH65?
So the problem with these suggestions in general is that there are lots of suggestions, and I don't know in what state those suggestions are in. For example, we also have an idea for a new synchronization protocol, which would be really nice to have, but it's not yet fully spec'd out. So I don't mind adding anything else that is fully spec'd out and fully agreed upon. The reason I was suggesting to go with this single change is because this one is, so we have test cases, we have everything, and it's something that is easy to roll out, and it's something that's needed. I'm really open to adding other stuff, but I don't want to start a whole research thread and a 1 year delay just because we don't know what else to add or how to add them. So anything that's ready, we can add, but stuff that's not ready, I would postpone to ETH65.
Right, and I think a deadline on that would help a lot. Ready by now when we ship, and ETH65 will ship sometime in the next year. I think would be a good way to go with that.
Yeah, I don't really agree. I mean, it's not like coordinating hard forks where everyone has to update simultaneously. As long as there are no conflicts, that the Geth team defines 64 this way and then someone else defines it differently, because then there'll be problems. But other than that, as long as we kind of coordinate, okay, so 64 is this thing and 65 is this next thing, I don't really see a problem with doing many releases or many versions incrementally.
Yeah, so one advantage of doing one advantage of doing 64 just as a tiny thing and then 65 as the next tiny thing is that it's a lot easier for a client to implement and make sure that it works and then implement the next thing and make sure that it works, versus if we create an ETH65 or ETH64 that contains a ton of features, then it's just really hard to make. It's a lot harder to make sure that it's implemented correctly, that clients agree on it, etc., etc. So
that makes sense.
So in theory, I kind of also like when I would also say that if we can make smaller releases to the protocol, smaller version bumps, then that is probably a bit healthier. But I'm a bit from this perspective, I'm a bit partial because I do see some urgency in solving the networking aspects, whereas the rest of the things are kind of niceties or optimizations that definitely should go in. For example, transaction propagation is another thing which should be solved, but it's not an immediate urgency. Whereas this whole network thing it stresses the network every time we do a fork.
Yeah, it would be nice if we could possibly ship it before the mainnet Istanbul, but definitely before Berlin.
I mean, we can ship it on Monday if we want to.
So the problem is you cannot. So if you want to upgrade the network, so this one won't have any effect on Istanbul, because so the whole idea of so if I add this extra field into the handshake, and then peers can decide that they are on a different chain, that also implicitly means that people who did not upgrade, they also need to be able to speak this new protocol. So essentially, if you didn't upgrade, then if you don't bother upgrading, then you won't have this update which allows you to do this fancy handshake. So essentially what I'm saying is that this won't fix Ropsten and this won't fix Gurley and Rinkaby. On mainnet, well, if people update and the mainnet fork won't happen for, I don't know, 1-2 months, then it might help a bit, but realistically, it will probably help for the next hard fork.
So a change like this does need to be paired with a hard fork, or it doesn't need to be?
Does not.
Okay.
It does not need to be. We retain backwards compatibility on ETH63, but if anyone wants to speak ETH64, then we exchange the fork ID.
So essentially, the reason. So currently the problem with Ropsten are with nodes that didn't upgrade, but if nodes don't upgrade, then they won't have this ETH64 either to solve the problem. So that's why I'm saying that it is a solution for a future hard fork. I mean, it will help a future hard fork when everybody in the network will be actually running ETH64 already.
So I don't think we have quorum this week to say yes to it, but I like it, and we should probably bring it up again in 2 weeks.
I was gonna say, is it worth also just posting maybe on the All Core Devs Gitter to see if we, like, if we do want to do this quick?
A couple days ago.
Yeah, and it's been posted to the PM, and it's been a public EAP for half a year and accepted.
But I think what's needed is probably to post and say we're gonna ship ETH64 is just this change. Bring your objections to All Core Devs in 2 weeks.
And maybe if we treat it like the EIP fork-centric process, that if there are things that are currently ready to be added in, then they can be talked about. But things that need to get ready to be added in should be a different conversation. Is that fair to say?
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, let's just I guess share this proposal probably on the Core Devs Gitter and maybe like an ETH Magician's thread, and see if there's any comments in the next 2 weeks, and otherwise we can kind of accept it on the next Core Devs call officially. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
No objections. Was there anything else anyone wanted to bring up? Okay. In that case, quickly going over the action items. There was one around David Palm. We'll talk to Wei Tang to see if 2200s should be self-contained. Wei is not on the call, but I don't know if anyone has an update there. Okay. Okay, so I guess we'll leave that as a kind of continuing action item. And the other one was for the cat herders to write a blog post about Istanbul. That was done. I can share it in the chat here in case anyone hasn't seen it yet. And great. So I don't know if there's any client updates, testing updates, research updates that people want to share.
Oh, I do have one update.
Go ahead.
It's completely independent of Istanbul, but we did a Geth release a couple of days ago. It was 196, I think. And among them, quite a few fixes, we actually tweaked LevelDB a bit. And if you do a fast sync, this tweak reduces your disk IO by about half. And if you do a full sync, it reduces by a factor of 10. So it kind of reduces disk IO by an entire order of magnitude. And we're kind of really happy about this. So if anyone wants to benchmark it and see how the UGETH performs, we're really curious to see numbers out in the wild. That's it.
That's impressive. Nice. Any other updates? Okay. Then I guess that's it, unless there's any final discussion items people want to bring up.
I posted a link to the research I did last year on the Ice Age for people who are interested in going back on that.
Okay. Thanks, James.
In the all core devs and in the chat.
Awesome.
Thanks for the link. I didn't see it and it's very useful.
Okay, then in that case, I guess this is it for today. Have a nice weekend, everybody, and I guess we'll see some of you at DEF CON next week.
Just a quick question
Oh,
regarding
please.
DEF CON. Is there going to be a core dev meeting there in person?
Yes, so it's like the second item on the agenda. If you look, there's actually a link. So on the first day of DEF CON in the afternoon, it's called Ethereum Roadmap 2020 agenda item.
Yes.
And so the afternoon is kind of split in four. The first part is like the ETH1 roadmap. The second part is the transition from ETH1 to ETH2. The third part is ETH2. And the fourth part is for working groups to work on anything that comes out of those sessions. So yeah, the first afternoon of the first day of DEF CON is that session.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much.
Was there time for that?
There is, let me just pull it up. DEF CON agenda.
I think it's 1 in the afternoon.
Yeah, like basic, I'm just not sure if it starts at 1 or at noon. Okay, so the ETH 1.0, 1.x session starts at 1 p.m. in the convention room, and all the other ones are just back to back after that. So
So 1 p.m.
Yeah, I put.
I have my talk somewhere around 3, I think.
You have your talk. Sorry, what?
During the afternoon there somewhere on the first day.
Oh, okay. I just checked. Your talk is like at 3:30, so that should be during the ETH 2 session, or actually during the working groups. So like the ETH 1, the transition, and the ETH 2 sessions are all before your talk, Martin.
Okay, then. Sorry.
Next all core devs call from Pooja. That's a good question. I assume 2 weeks from now, same time. So the week after DEF CON. Does that make sense?
2 weeks after DEF CON, okay.
No, sorry, the week after DEF CON. So 2 weeks from today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So I assume everyone here is going to be there, and I have some of my colleagues have informal meetings with some of you guys. So great.
Awesome. Okay, I guess that's it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good job.
That was it. Cool. I like these Oracle F calls.
Yeah. Quick and efficient.
Okay, then I guess that was it. So thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.